The wind howled like a hungry wolf, clawing at Constance's threadbare cloak. Snow, thick and relentless, swirled around her, blurring the already fading light. She pulled the worn fabric tighter, but it offered little comfort against the biting cold. Her breath puffed out in white clouds that vanished almost as quickly as they appeared. Constance was alone, utterly, terrifyingly alone. The old wagon, its wheels long since seized by the accumulating snow, was now more of a burden than a help. She had unhitched her tired mare, Bess, hoping the animal could find some meager shelter, some patch of grass beneath the ever-deepening drifts. But the blizzard didn't care about Bess. It didn't care about Constance. Her stomach tightened with a sharp, familiar pain. It wasn't just hunger. This was different. A deep, aching throb that radiated through her entire body. Her time was near. Panic clawed at her throat. She had hoped to reach the small town of Havenwood before the baby came. Now, Havenwood felt like a distant dream, swallowed by the storm. Each gust of wind seemed to mock her dwindling hope. She stumbled forward, her heavy coat dragging in the snow. The vast, white wilderness offered no landmarks, no solace, only the relentless fury of the blizzard. She wrapped her arms across her swollen belly, trying to shield the child within from the brutal elements. She remembered her mother's words, spoken years ago. A woman is strongest when she thinks she is broken. But right now, Constance felt anything but strong. She was cold, scared, and alone, with a baby about to be born in the middle of nowhere. Tears, freezing as they tracked down her cheeks, mingled with the falling snow. She knew she couldn't give up. She had to keep moving, keep fighting for the sake of the tiny life inside her. But as the storm intensified and the darkness deepened, Constance wasn't sure how much longer she could endure the blizzard's fury. Each step was an act of defiance against the overwhelming odds, a testament to the fierce, unwavering love for the child she had yet to meet. Another sharp pain ripped through her, stronger this time, stealing her breath. Constance gasped, clutching at her stomach. She sank to her knees in the snow, the cold seeping through her thin trousers. "No, not now," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that she couldn't go any further. The baby was coming, whether she was ready or not. Tears streamed down her face, not just from the cold, but from pure, unadulterated fear. She was alone, in the middle of a blizzard about to give birth. How could she possibly do this? She tried to remember the stories her grandmother used to tell, stories of strong pioneer women who faced even greater hardships. But those stories felt distant and unreal, like fairy tales meant to comfort children. The next pain was even more intense, a searing wave that left her breathless and trembling. She cried out, a desperate, ragged sound that was swallowed by the storm. "Help!" she screamed, her voice cracking with panic. "Please, someone help me." But only the wind answered, its icy breath mocking her plea. She knew it was foolish to call out. There was no one around for miles, only the unforgiving wilderness and the relentless snow. But she couldn't help herself. Desperation had stripped away her pride, her self-reliance, leaving her raw and vulnerable. She closed her eyes, picturing her mother's face, her gentle smile. "You are stronger than you think," her mother had always said. But right now, Constance felt anything but strong. She felt small and insignificant, lost in a world that seemed determined to crush her. Another wave of pain crashed over her, even more intense than the last. She bit her lip, trying to stifle a scream. She had to be strong. She had to be brave. Not for herself, but for the child inside her. But as the blizzard raged on, and the pains grew closer and more agonizing, Constance feared that her strength was failing. She worried that she wouldn't make it, that she and her baby would be swallowed by the storm, lost forever in the vast, white wilderness. The cry for help had been a last, desperate act, and now, silence was her only reply. Just as her hope flickered and threatened to die completely, a shadow emerged from the swirling white chaos. At first, Constance thought it was a hallucination, a cruel trick of the storm. But then the shadow took shape, resolving into the figure of a man. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered and lined, framed by a thick, dark beard dusted with snow. He wore a heavy fur coat and a fur hat pulled low over his brow, making it difficult to see his eyes. He moved with a quiet confidence, as if he were as much a part of the wilderness as the wind and the snow. Constance stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. Was he real, or was this some phantom conjured by her fear and exhaustion? He knelt beside her in the snow, his movements surprisingly gentle. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice deep and raspy but kind. Constance could only shake her head, tears freezing on her cheeks. She was too weak, too overwhelmed to speak. "You're in labor," he stated, his gaze sweeping over her swollen belly. "It wasn't a question. We need to get you out of this storm." He reached out a gloved hand to help her up, but Constance flinched away, her eyes wide with suspicion. She didn't know this man. She didn't know if she could trust him. "Who are you?" she managed to croak, her voice barely a whisper. "My name is Elias," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I live in a cabin not far from here. I can help you." Constance hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to be cautious. She had learned long ago not to trust strangers, especially men. But she looked at the storm raging around her, at the fear in her own heart, and knew she had no other choice. "Please," she whispered, her voice filled with desperation. "Please help me." Elias nodded, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. He carefully helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as she struggled to stand. The pain was almost unbearable now, but she knew she had to keep going. With Elias's strong arm around her, Constance took her first tentative step towards the mysterious cabin, towards an uncertain future, and towards the hope that maybe, just maybe, she and her baby would be all right. The journey to Elias's cabin felt like an eternity. Each step was a battle against the biting wind and the mounting pain. Constance leaned heavily on Elias, his strength a welcome support against her weakening body. The snow seemed to cling to her boots, determined to drag her down. Finally, through the swirling snow, a faint light appeared. As they drew closer, the outline of a small cabin emerged, a beacon of hope in the desolate landscape. Smoke curled from its chimney, promising warmth and shelter. Elias pushed open the heavy wooden door, and Constance stepped inside, her breath catching in her throat. The cabin was small, but it felt incredibly cozy. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting a warm glow on the rough-hewn walls. The air smelled of wood smoke and pine, a comforting scent that eased some of her fear. A thick rug lay on the floor, and a rocking chair sat invitingly beside the fire. A small table held a lantern and a few simple dishes. A loft ladder led to what she assumed was a sleeping area. It was a simple dwelling, but it was clean and well cared for, a testament to Elias's solitary life. "Sit down," Elias said gently, guiding her to the rocking chair. "I'll get you some warm water and blankets." Constance gratefully sank into the chair, her aching body sighing with relief. The warmth of the fire seeped into her bones, chasing away some of the chill. She watched as Elias moved around the cabin with a quiet efficiency, his movements practiced and sure. He brought her a steaming cup of water and a stack of thick blankets. She wrapped herself in the blankets, shivering despite the warmth. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Elias simply nodded, his eyes filled with concern. "I'll check on the fire," he said, turning back to the hearth. Constance closed her eyes, letting the warmth and the quiet soothe her frayed nerves. She was safe for now. She was out of the storm, in a place of warmth and shelter. But even as she relaxed, a sliver of doubt remained. She still didn't know Elias. She still didn't know what his intentions were. But for the moment, she had no choice but to trust him. Her baby was coming, and she needed his help. The cozy cabin offered a temporary reprieve, a sanctuary from the storm, but the uncertainty of the future still weighed heavily on her heart. The pains grew stronger and closer together, each one a wave threatening to pull her under. Elias, calm and steady, helped her lie down on a makeshift bed he prepared near the fire. He brought her warm cloths and spoke words of encouragement, his voice a soothing balm against her fear. "You're doing great," he said, his eyes filled with reassurance. "Just breathe." Constance gripped his hand, her knuckles white, and focused on his words. She pushed, strained, and cried out, her body racked with pain. Elias remained by her side, offering unwavering support. He seemed to know exactly what to do, his presence a surprising source of comfort. Hours blurred into a hazy nightmare of pain and exhaustion. Constance felt like she was teetering on the edge of oblivion, her strength almost completely gone. But then, with one final, earth-shattering push, everything changed. A cry, thin but strong, filled the cabin. Constance collapsed back against the pillows, her body trembling with relief. Elias gently cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket. "It's a boy," he said, his voice filled with awe. "A healthy, beautiful boy." He placed the baby in Constance's arms. She gazed down at the tiny face, her heart overflowing with love. He had a mop of dark hair and tiny, perfect fingers. He was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Simon," she whispered, the name feeling right on her tongue. "His name is Simon." Tears streamed down her face, tears of joy and exhaustion. She looked up at Elias, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for everything." Elias smiled, a rare and genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. "You did all the work," he said. "I just helped a little." He busied himself with cleaning up, but Constance could see the warmth in his eyes, the tenderness in his movements. In that moment, something shifted between them. A bond had formed, forged in the crucible of pain and joy. She still didn't know him, not really, but she knew that he had saved her life and the life of her son. And for that, she would be forever grateful. Little Simon, born in the midst of a blizzard, had brought a spark of hope into the darkness, a tiny flame that promised to grow into something strong and bright. The next few days were a blur of feeding schedules, sleepless nights, and the slow, steady rhythm of recovery. Constance spent most of her time in the rocking chair, nursing Simon and watching Elias. He took care of the cabin, chopped wood, and melted snow for water, always careful not to disturb them. She noticed the small things, the way he hummed softly as he worked, the gentle touch he used when he adjusted Simon's blankets, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled at the baby. Despite her growing gratitude, a part of her remained guarded. Old wounds ran deep, and the scars of past betrayals still ached. She kept her answers short, her gaze watchful. Elias seemed to sense her hesitation. He never pressed her for information, never pried into her past. He simply offered his help and his quiet companionship. One evening, as the fire crackled merrily in the hearth, Elias sat down across from her, a cup of tea in his hands. Simon was asleep in a cradle Elias had fashioned from a wooden box. "He's a good baby," Elias said softly, his gaze fixed on Simon. "He is," Constance agreed, a smile touching her lips. A comfortable silence settled between them. Then Elias spoke, his voice low and hesitant. "You don't trust me, do you?" Constance hesitated. "It's not that I don't trust you," she said finally. "It's just, I don't trust easily." Elias nodded, his expression understanding. "I understand," he said. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to. But I want you to know that I won't hurt you or Simon." His words were simple, but they carried a weight of sincerity that touched Constance's heart. She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of deception, but all she saw was honesty and kindness. Slowly, cautiously, Constance began to let her guard down. She started to ask Elias about his life, about his cabin, about the wilderness he called home. She learned that he had lived in the cabin for many years, that he was a skilled hunter and trapper, and that he valued his solitude. She also learned that there was a deep sadness in his eyes, a hint of pain that he kept carefully hidden. She sensed that he, too, had his own secrets, his own wounds. And as she began to understand him, a flicker of something new sparked within her, a tentative hope, a fragile seed of connection that might one day blossom into something more. The silence between them began to shift, becoming less about suspicion and more about shared understanding. One particularly quiet afternoon, with Simon nestled asleep in her arms, Constance found herself drawn to the window. The snow had stopped, and the sun was shining brightly, turning the landscape into a sparkling wonderland. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Elias said, standing beside her. "Yes," Constance replied, her gaze distant. "But it can also be cruel." Elias nodded. "That's true of most things in life, I reckon." His words sparked something within her, a desire to share the burden of her past. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice hesitant at first, then gaining strength as she went on. She told him about her childhood, about her dreams of a happy family, and about the man who had shattered those dreams, leaving her alone and pregnant. She spoke of the fear and shame that had driven her to flee, to seek refuge in the vast wilderness. Elias listened without interrupting, his eyes filled with compassion. When she finished, he simply nodded, his silence more comforting than any words could have been. "Thank you for telling me," he said finally. "It can't have been easy." Constance shook her head. "It wasn't, but it feels lighter now, somehow." Encouraged by his understanding, Elias began to share his own story. He spoke of his wife and daughter, who had been taken by a terrible illness years ago. He described the emptiness that had consumed him after their deaths, the reason he had sought solace in the solitude of the cabin. "I thought I could never love again," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "But then you came along, and Simon." Constance reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "We needed you, Elias," she said softly. "And maybe you needed us, too." As they stood there, hand in hand, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, a profound connection formed between them. They were two broken souls, brought together by chance and circumstance, finding solace and healing in each other's presence. The secrets they had shared had stripped away the last vestiges of their distrust, leaving them vulnerable but also stronger, ready to face the future together, whatever it might hold. The cabin, once a place of solitude for Elias, now felt like a sanctuary for them both, a haven from the storms of their past. Elias's sadness was a constant undercurrent in the cabin, a silent melody that played beneath the surface of his everyday actions. Constance saw it in the way he looked at Simon, a mixture of joy and a profound longing. She saw it in the way he tended to the small, forgotten corner of the cabin garden, where a few hardy wildflowers stubbornly bloomed, remnants of his wife's love for beauty. He rarely spoke of his loss directly, but Constance could feel the weight of it in every quiet moment, in every shared glance. She understood that his solitude wasn't a choice, but a consequence of a grief so deep it had driven him to seek refuge in the wilderness. One day, while Constance was mending a tear in Simon's blanket, she found a small, wooden box tucked away in a drawer. Curiosity piqued, she opened it. Inside, she found a faded photograph of a smiling woman with kind eyes and a little girl with bright, mischievous grin. Constance recognized the woman from the way Elias sometimes looked at her, a fleeting glimpse of recognition and then a quick withdrawal. She knew, without being told, that these were his wife and daughter. She carefully closed the box and placed it back in the drawer, her heart aching for Elias. She understood now why he had been so hesitant to let her in, why he had kept his distance for so long. He was afraid to love again, afraid to risk losing someone else he cared about. That evening, after Simon was asleep, Constance sat beside Elias by the fire. "I saw the picture," she said softly. "Your wife and daughter were beautiful." Elias stiffened, his expression clouding over with pain. "They were," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They were everything to me." He fell silent, staring into the flames, his eyes filled with a sorrow so profound it made Constance's heart ache. She reached out and took his hand, offering him her silent support. "It's okay to miss them," she said gently. "It's okay to be sad." Elias squeezed her hand tightly, his grip a silent acknowledgement of his pain. He looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude and a glimmer of hope. "Thank you, Constance," he said. Thank you for understanding." In that moment, Constance realized that Elias's sadness wasn't a barrier between them, but a bridge. It was a shared experience, a common ground upon which they could build a deeper, more meaningful connection. His grief was a part of him, but it didn't define him. And with her help, he might just find a way to heal, to love again, and to embrace the possibility of a future filled with joy and happiness, alongside the lingering memories of those he had lost. The sadness was still there, but it was no longer a solitary burden. It was a shared sorrow, carried together. Even as Constance's feelings for Elias deepened, a persistent fear gnawed at her. It was a fear born of experience, a deep-seated belief that depending on someone was a recipe for heartache. She had learned, the hard way, that people could disappoint you, that promises could be broken, and that love could turn into pain. She had built walls around her heart, protecting herself from further hurt. And now, those walls were starting to crumble, threatened by her growing affection for Elias and her dependence on him for Simon's well-being. She found herself pulling back, creating distance, even when she longed to be closer. She would catch herself relying on him, then immediately try to do things on her own, proving to herself that she didn't need him. It was a constant battle between her heart and her head, between her desire for connection and her fear of vulnerability. One morning, while Elias was out hunting, Constance found herself struggling to lift a heavy bucket of water. Her weakened state made the task almost impossible, and she felt a surge of frustration. "I can do this," she muttered to herself, gritting her teeth. "I don't need anyone's help." But as she strained and struggled, the bucket slipped from her grasp, sending water splashing across the floor. Tears of frustration welled up in her eyes. Just then, Elias walked in, his expression softening when he saw her distress. "Here, let me help you with that," he said gently, taking the bucket from her hands. Constance turned away, her cheeks flushed with shame. "I could have done it myself," she insisted, her voice tight. Elias sighed. "Constance, it's okay to accept help," he said. "You don't have to do everything alone." "But I do," she retorted, her voice rising. "I always have. I can't depend on anyone. It always ends badly." Elias stepped closer, his eyes filled with concern. "What happened to you, Constance?" he asked softly. "What made you so afraid to trust?" Constance hesitated, her heart aching with the weight of her past. She looked at Elias, at the genuine concern in his eyes, and knew that she couldn't keep her walls up forever. "I'll tell you someday," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "But not today." Elias nodded, respecting her boundaries. "Whenever you're ready," he said. "But I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. You and Simon can depend on me. I promise." His words were like a balm to her wounded soul. She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could learn to trust again. Maybe she could let her walls down just a little. Maybe she could allow herself to need someone without fear of being hurt. The fear was still there, but it was no longer all-consuming. It was a challenge to be overcome, a hurdle to be cleared on the path to healing and happiness. Caring for Simon became a shared responsibility, a delicate dance of teamwork and mutual support. Constance, still recovering her strength, often found herself relying on Elias for tasks that had once seemed simple. He would fetch water, chop wood, and tend to the fire, always keeping a watchful eye on Simon while she rested. Elias, in turn, learned to anticipate Simon's needs, recognizing his different cries and soothing him with gentle rocking and soft humming. He discovered a tenderness he thought he had lost forever, a paternal instinct that had been dormant for years. Together, they navigated the challenges of parenthood, learning from each other and supporting each other through sleepless nights and fussy days. They discovered that their individual strengths complemented each other, creating a harmonious balance in the cabin. Constance, with her nurturing instincts and her unwavering love for Simon, provided the emotional foundation for their little family. Elias, with his practical skills and his quiet strength, provided the stability and security they needed to survive in the wilderness. One evening, As they sat by the fire, watching Simon sleep peacefully in his cradle, Constance realized that she was no longer afraid to depend on Elias. She had seen his kindness, his compassion, and his unwavering commitment to her and Simon. She knew that he was a man of his word, a man she could trust with her life and the life of her son. "Thank you, Elias," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. "For everything. For helping me. For taking care of Simon. For being here." Elias smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "We're a team, Constance," he said. "We're in this together." He reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. In that moment, Constance knew that she was no longer alone. She had found a partner, a friend, and a lover in the most unexpected of places. She had found a home in the wilderness, a family in the heart of a stranger. And she knew, with a certainty that warmed her from the inside out, that they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. The shared responsibility of caring for Simon had inadvertently broken down her walls, brick by brick, replacing them with a foundation built on trust, respect, and love. The wilderness had tested her, but had also given her the greatest gift of all, a family to call her own. With each passing day, the friendship between Constance and Elias deepened. The cabin, once filled with silence and unspoken emotions, now echoed with laughter, stories, and the comfortable rhythm of shared lives. They found solace in each other's company, sharing chores and tasks that once felt burdensome when done alone. Constance learned to bake bread using Elias's mother's recipe, the aroma filling the cabin with warmth and sweetness. Elias, in turn, helped Constance plant a small vegetable garden, carefully tending to the seedlings with a surprising gentleness. Evenings were spent by the fire, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, and their dreams. Constance told Elias about her childhood on a small farm, about her love for horses, and about her aspirations to become a teacher. Elias shared tales of his adventures in the wilderness, of tracking animals and navigating treacherous terrain. They discovered shared interests and surprising connections, laughing over silly jokes and comforting each other during moments of sadness. The cabin, once a symbol of Elias's solitude, now felt like a haven of companionship, a place where they could be themselves, without judgment or pretense. Simon, too, thrived in the atmosphere of love and warmth. He gurgled and cooed, his eyes following Constance and Elias as they moved about the cabin. He seemed to sense the connection between them, the unspoken affection that bound them together. One afternoon, as Constance was teaching Elias how to play a simple card game, Simon began a fuss. Without a word, Elias picked him up and cradled him in his arms, gently rocking him until he fell asleep. Constance watched them, her heart overflowing with love. She had never imagined that she could find such happiness, such peace, in the heart of the wilderness, with a man she had once feared and distrusted. "You're good with him," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. Elias smiled, his eyes twinkling with joy. "He's a good boy," he replied. "He's brought a lot of light into my life." He looked at Constance, his gaze filled with tenderness. "You both have," he added. Constance reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. She knew that their friendship was more than just companionship. It was a deep, abiding connection, a love that had been forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the challenges of survival. And as they sat there, hand in hand, watching Simon sleep, they knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be, together in the heart of their own little world. The shared chores and silly stories were building a foundation of love and laughter, solidifying their friendship into something unbreakable. One morning, Constance awoke to an unusual silence. The wind, which had been howling for days, had finally ceased. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding with anticipation. She crept to the window and peered outside. The sight that greeted her took her breath away. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed into a pristine wonderland. The sun, a brilliant disk of gold, shone brightly in the clear blue sky, casting long shadows across the snow-covered fields. The air was crisp and clean, and the world seemed to sparkle with newfound life. Constance felt a surge of hope, a sense of renewal washing over her. The storm, which had threatened to destroy her, had finally passed, leaving behind a promise of a new beginning. She woke Elias and Simon, eager to share the beauty of the morning with them. They stood together outside the cabin, gazing at the transformed landscape. Simon, bundled in blankets, cooed and gurgled, his eyes wide with wonder. "It's beautiful," Constance said, her voice filled with awe. "It is," Elias agreed, his eyes fixed on the horizon. A new beginning. The passing of the storm marked a turning point in their lives. It was a symbol of the challenges they had overcome, the obstacles they had conquered, and the love they had found in the midst of adversity. With the sun shining brightly, the snow melting, and the promise of spring in the air, Constance knew that it was time to make a decision about their future. She had to decide whether to stay in the cabin with Elias and Simon or to venture out into the world, seeking a new life for herself and her son. The thought of leaving Elias filled her with a pang of sadness. She had grown to love him, to depend on him, and to cherish the life they had built together in the wilderness. But she also knew that she had to consider what was best for Simon. She needed to provide him with a stable home, an education, and opportunities that might not be available in the isolated cabin. The world outside beckoned, offering both promise and uncertainty. The clear skies and bright sun were a stark contrast to the turmoil she felt inside, torn between her growing love for Elias and her responsibility to provide a future for Simon. The end of the storm brought clarity to the landscape, but also a difficult decision for Constance. The decision weighed heavily on Constance's mind, casting a shadow over the joy of the clear skies and the warmth of the sun. She spent her days lost in thought, torn between her love for Elias and her responsibility to Simon. She pictured herself leaving the cabin, venturing out into the unknown, facing the challenges of the world alone. She imagined finding a small town, securing a job as a teacher, and providing Simon with a stable and secure future. But the thought of leaving Elias, of severing the bond they had forged, filled her with a deep sense of sadness. She also considered staying in the cabin, embracing the simple life, and building a future with Elias and Simon. She imagined them working together, tending to the garden, and raising Simon in the heart of the wilderness. But she worried about the limitations of their isolated existence, about the lack of opportunities for Simon, and about whether she would be truly happy in the long term. She knew that she had to make a decision, not just for herself, but for Elias and Simon as well. She couldn't continue to waver, to straddle the line between two different worlds. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Constance turned to Elias, her heart pounding in her chest. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Elias looked at her, his expression filled with concern. "What is it, Constance?" he asked softly. Constance took a deep breath and poured out her heart. "I don't know what to do, Elias," Constance confessed, her voice choked with emotion. "I love you, but I also want what's best for Simon. I don't know if I can give him that here." Elias listened patiently, his eyes filled with understanding. When she finished, he reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. "Constance," he said softly, "I want what's best for you and Simon, too. I know this life isn't easy, but I also know that we can make it work if we're together." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "I love you, Constance," he continued, "and I love Simon. I want to be a part of your lives, to help you build a future, whatever that may be." His words touched Constance's heart, melting away her doubts and fears. She looked at Elias, at the love in his eyes, and realized that she had already found what she was searching for. She had found a home, a family, and a love that transcended the limitations of their isolated existence. She thought of Simon, of the joy he brought to their lives, and of the love and support he would receive from both her and Elias. She realized that a stable home wasn't just about material possessions or educational opportunities. It was about love, security, and belonging. And she knew that she and Simon already had that with Elias. "I want to stay," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I want to be with you, Elias. I want us to be a family." Elias's face lit up with joy. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her and Simon. "I'm so happy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise, we'll make this work. We'll build a good life together, here in the cabin." In that moment, Constance knew that she had made the right decision. She had found her home, not in a place, but in the hearts of the people she loved. She and Simon belonged with Elias, and they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, together, as a family. The small cabin, once a symbol of solitude, now represented their shared love and commitment, a haven where they could grow and thrive, surrounded by the beauty of the wilderness and the warmth of their connection. The choice was made, not out of fear or obligation, but out of love and a deep sense of belonging. Years passed, and the cabin in the woods became a true home, filled with love, laughter, and the comforting rhythm of family life. Constance, Elias, and Simon thrived in their isolated haven, finding joy in the simple things and strength in their unwavering bond. Simon grew into a bright and adventurous young boy, exploring the wilderness with Elias, learning to hunt, fish, and track animals. He also learned to read and write from Constance, who instilled in him a love for learning and a thirst for knowledge. Constance, with Elias's support, transformed the small garden into a vibrant oasis, growing vegetables, herbs, and flowers that brought beauty and sustenance to their lives. She also began teaching the children of the nearby settlers, sharing her knowledge and passion for education. Elias, with Constance and Simon by his side, rediscovered his joy in life. He learned to love again, to embrace the present, and to cherish every moment with his new family. The sadness that had once haunted his eyes gradually faded, replaced by a warmth and contentment that radiated from within. They faced challenges, of course, as all families do. There were harsh winters, difficult harvests, and moments of doubt and uncertainty. But through it all, they remained steadfast in their love and commitment to each other. One evening, as they sat by the fire, watching Simon read aloud from a book, Constance looked at Elias, her heart overflowing with gratitude. "I never thought I could be this happy," she said softly. Elias smiled, his eyes filled with love. "Neither did I," he replied. "But we found each other, and we built something special, something that will last." He reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. Simon looked up from his book, his eyes shining with joy. He knew that he was loved, that he was safe, and that he belonged. And as the fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting a warm glow on their faces, Constance, Elias, and Simon knew that they had found their happily ever after, not in a fairy tale castle, but in a simple cabin in the woods, surrounded by the beauty of the wilderness and the warmth of their love. The blizzard had brought them together, but their love and commitment had created a family, a home, and a happiness that would endure for generations to come. The story ends not with an easy life, but a fulfilling one, built on love, resilience, and the enduring power of human connection.